Well, welcome back to Pastor Plek's podcast, recording from Austin, Texas, where we talk faith, culture, and everything in between. I'm Pastor Plek, and with me in studio today is the one and only Pastor Joseph Aiken III.
What's going on, everybody?
And you may not know this, we also have a counseling trusty intern who is also the female voice of today, sitting in for Katie Sass today and producing as well. A lot of Jane of all trades going on. We have Lizzie Turk.
Hello, it's great to be here.
And from the Cody Sparks band. Pretty much Texas famous, if you're familiar with Texas country music. Pretty excited about Cody Sparks. Cody Sparks is with us in studio today. How you doing, Cody?
So good.
All right.
This is great. I just learned a lot of things. I didn't know you were the third.
Yeah.
Joseph's the third.
I've
really never thought about Jane of all trades.
You know, and this is why you need to listen to Pastor Plek's podcast on the regular, Cody. This is
Yeah.
a part of your indoctrination, and this will be a part of your future.
Yep. Here I am.
Here you are. All right. So wanted to talk about several things today. And first off, we're going to talk about the sermon that preached on Sunday. And then we're going to talk about some things going on in faith culture and everything in between. So this week, we really wanted to hammer and talk about there's this call for unity in the Bible in John 17 that when Jesus prays the high priestly prayer, he's asking that the church would be one with Jesus and God the Father. There'd be this oneness experience, and we resist that. And I think there's probably two reasons we resist it. We don't think that it affects non-Christians, and we also don't think this affects our personal relationship with God. Now, Pastor Joseph, talk to me real quick. Have you seen that? Have you seen people sort of, when they think about Christian community, they think probably the last thing that they think about is this is going to be a way to reach lost people, people who don't know Jesus, people who are far from God, but our ability to be one affects those who don't know God.
Well, I think you touched on some good things yesterday, or during the sermon. We was talking about how people are looking on the outside in and they're looking to see how we look. And so if you see just as much dysfunction in the church as outside the church, why do I want to go in there?
Right.
And so if your house is messy, I think is that some of the illustrations you have, you're not inviting people over.
Right.
And so we don't realize that people are they're going to look before they want to come in, and how our unity affects how we engage with people, or how their willingness to be receptive to the things that we're saying.
Yeah. And Cody, the other thing that I mentioned is that I don't think the church understands that when we don't live in unity, it affects our personal relationship with God. In fact, the saying that I mentioned that's kind of common is, I don't need to go to church to have a relationship with God. Have you seen that? Is that something that you would say, oh, I've experienced that? You're a preacher's kid, by the way.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen
I
that?
learned something new now today.
Yeah. He's a preacher's kid. His dad's a pastor in Perryton, Texas, which is, I think, like just miles from Oklahoma.
7 miles.
7 miles south.
Wrote a song about.
And you can find that everywhere.
Yeah.
You get your
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
kidding.
Yeah. Spotify, iTunes,
Cody Sparks Band.
It's there.
.com.
I'll take those spins.
Yeah. So
Give me my penny.
Yeah, talk to us though about how you've seen people really say that about, I don't need to go to church to have a relationship with God.
Yeah. I think that the biggest thing is that people get, nowadays especially, we can just watch online or we can sit at home, but you're missing the big part of what we're talking about, community.
Sure.
And having people there and having people to talk to, and basically having friendships while also talking about what you're learning is huge.
Yeah, and I even feel like people, like, usually it's I don't want to call them not Christian. It's people who would say they're Christian, but their life doesn't reflect it. And what they generally say is, I don't need to go to church to have a relationship with God. And what they mean is, my salvation isn't affected by a church attendance, which everyone would agree with. However, your relationship with God is definitely affected by your, I don't call it church attendance, but by your interaction, your tangible interaction with the body of Christ. And so we really hammer, I keep saying that, but we really touched on a couple of things that Jesus and I call this racetrack prayer. And I don't know if anybody else has experienced somebody that just keeps praying the same thing over and over again. And I used to get annoyed with that. Well, I probably still get annoyed with it, but I'm not going to be annoyed with it from now on, because I noticed that that's how Jesus prayed on this one prayer. I was like, I can't get upset at people for praying like Jesus. And so he says 3 times, I don't ask only for these only, but also for those who will believe in me through their word, that they all may all be one, just as you, Father, in me, and I in you, that they may be in us. And then he says, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. That's in verse 21. And then in verse 22, so that the world may know that you sent me. And clearly, this is so crazy. And then verse 23, so that the world may know that you sent me. I mean, this is 21, 22, 23, 3 times God's word says in Jesus' prayer. Like, this is Jesus praying before God, saying the reason why they have to get along, the reason why they live in unity, the reason why that they're one with us is so that the world will know. So our ability to live out Christian community is going to be a place where there is real deal evangelism. Now, have you guys seen that in Lizzie, I would love for you to chime in here. Have you experienced this where somebody maybe belonged to Christian community before they believed in Christ? Have you seen that, or have you seen people come to faith? And I'm really, this for everybody, but have you seen people come to faith through community or smaller groups?
Well, yeah, and I mean, I can't even think of like specific examples, but what I will say is I have been part of groups where, like, there was, thinking of a recent time, there was a couple who had a baby, and it was someone who a friend of mine, they knew from work, and she didn't, the family was not involved in church, really didn't have a ton of family to support them around. And so my friend set up a meal train, and a bunch of us women signed up. I've never met this woman before who just had the baby. Didn't know her, and we just were able to show up with meals and get to know her, get to know the baby, and basically like began inviting her into our community. And it was fascinating because we were talking with her, and it's like she didn't even understand why we were doing this for her, why strangers were bringing her meals and wanting to invest time and energy into getting to know her. And I will say, I don't know if she ever did end up accepting Christ, but she definitely felt, God's presence. I definitely, she saw a difference in the way that we lived and did life.
Yeah. How about you, Joseph? Have you experienced that, seen that in any smaller group setting? It doesn't necessarily have to be our church, but our in the church overarchingly, the ability to be one, being an evangelistic tool.
I know here I've experienced it through other people's relationships, where I see people that come and you or even James share the gospel, and you see them kind of give their lives to Christ. I know even now we have active non-believers who pour into our ministries, from being in the parking lot helping set up to just other different things. And so I think I'm all for it. I believe that God is definitely working where people see the unity.
I think one of the guys that works in our parking lot, Matty, he's sweet guy.
Yeah.
And like we share the gospel with him, I think every single week. James, Pastor James, meets with him. I think it's every Wednesday at 4 p.m.
Yeah.
And he will go over a different book to read, and Maddie has been faithful in setting up our parking lot every Sunday for the past years.
Like
and we go, why are you doing this? And I don't even know if he's got an answer for that. Just like, I don't know, I'd like you guys. And you're like, okay, well, I appreciate that. Now here's another dose of the gospel. And so I feel like that's been a powerful moment. I really appreciate that thought of him really being involved in a Sunday morning experience, just setting up signs and then getting a gospel infusion. He comes to all services.
All of
When we had outside
yeah.
services, he was at every outside service. He'd set that up and he'd stay for it. Then he'd come to both inside services and participate in the worship service as well as set up. And so I one of the most faithful non-Christians at our church.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a good way to put it, but like he's more faithful than a lot of Christians we have, which I totally appreciate. Cody, what about you? How have you seen, and maybe from community group of people, one of the people I think of is Lalo, that not are there loving Jesus, but are just there in the periphery, kicking the tires and trying to figure it out?
There's a lot of things that come to mind on this one because I've seen since forever.
Yeah.
With just my parents and being in church.
Yeah, so talk about that. You can talk about give a shout out to your mom
I know
and dad.
that we pretty much growing up at our house had basically an open door policy.
Mm-hmm.
So people were just coming in and out.
What do you
like
mean
crazy.
by that? And I think that came as like even a shock for your family a little bit with your wife when she was like,
oh,
whoa.
yeah, just people. So, man, there's another story with her that will blow your mind. So just growing up, people would come over that needed help or needed prayer. And they would just show up at the house and knock on the door, and they would come in, and my parents would talk to them, pray for them. Or when we got older, friends. I remember in high school, I had a buddy. He had come to church a lot, and we had a breakout revival in high school one year, and it lasted like 5 or 6 months. But he had gotten saved and things like that. But I remember his senior year, he was partying and all that, and ended up coming over and sleeping on my parents' couch and throwing up on the couch. But my mom was always like, no, this is your safe space. It's okay. It's okay. Come back. I think I've told you this story before. When I was young, my dad was in the parking lot, kind of in the front foyer picking up cigarette butts.
Yeah.
And there's some person standing there and was like, can you believe smokers are coming here? They're throwing cigarette butts on the parking lot. And my dad, and I remember he was like, well, if there wasn't cigarette butts in the parking lot, we're not doing something right.
Nice.
So my thing is that you lead by example and love people, and that's what we do. So the more we feed into their life, the more slowly and just gradually they're getting that, and they're gaining what we're putting into their life. So we're sowing seed into them every Sunday with love and the word. And eventually they'll sprout, and they'll get it. Eventually they will get it.
How have you seen this reality play out in community group life?
Oh man, I think that I didn't even point this out this past Tuesday, but there's a guy in our community group who's been struggling with suicidal thoughts and drinking and issues. And when he first started coming to community group, he didn't want to come. And then people were like, no, you need to come. So he came. And then little by little, he's completely changing, and his thought process is different. The way that he looks at life is different. He's like, I know that I have a problem. I know that I have a drinking problem, or even being able to talk to people real, saying my family has a suicidal curse on them, and I've had these thoughts. To tell people that is huge. Yeah. Who would do that?
Yeah. Who would I mean, that's a bold statement to just go, to throw that out there. Like everybody in my family struggles with that.
Yeah. And so now there was another guy in our group that was there. I think he's been before, and he was there this past, he was like, hey, I can clearly see a change in your life.
Yeah.
And it might not be instant, but over the past, 3 or 4 months, he's completely turning a 180, and the way that he looks at life and the way that he thinks about things is completely different than he did by not even wanting to come to community group.
Right. Man, I love that. That's kind of where we're at with all that. So I thought that was good. I think what we ended up saying is like, what is preventing you from living in community and the unity aspect? And if there's anything that's preventing you from that, it's time to dive into anything do you want to add something to that, Lizzie?
Yeah. So I also, just when talking about like building relationships with people, I there's almost this stigma of, Christians just see everyone as projects or something like that. And I think people know that. People can sense that when they feel like, oh, this person's just trying to, get another person checked off their list for having shared Christ with. But when you actually want to get to know that person, invest time into them, they can tell the difference. I mean, I'm sure there's experiences that each of us have where we've experienced, oh, this person is just trying to talk with me or whatever just to get something out of it. And so, yeah, I think it's just like also being genuine. And yes, you want to share the gospel, but don't just act like it's a bunch of projects that, that God is like, okay.
It's a mission, not a project.
Exactly. I like it.
All right. So, Cody, I wanted you to get, obviously, there's many reasons to have you on, but one of the things that I think you give perspective to is the stuff going down with Hillsong and the documentary that came out recently. And, how that affects you as a worship leader that plays a bunch of Hillsong songs, and just really where, you, especially as we talk about community and unity, and like, where is the line? Because as we, Mars Hill, Christianity Today did a huge podcast story on the rise and fall of Mars Hill Church, which is Mark Driscoll, and now you've got Discovery Plus, I guess, doing a docu-series on Hillsong, and then it just recently ended with Brian Houston, the leader of the entire, I don't call it empire, that's probably a bad word, the leader of the mega church in Australia that has campuses in London and New York and all over the place. He resigned. So first off, that's tragic. I think as Christians, whether they're not exactly in our stream, whenever you see a Christian ministry fall, it's just like the worst. And you just you're reminded of how frail humanity is and how sinful and dark we are, and how much we need the cross. But as one who has sort of experienced that more so, watching the docuseries, watching all that unfold, give me your perspective on what you know about all that, Cody, and just will help us give us a framework to think about this.
Okay, because this is tough. And here's my first point of this. Yesterday, when at church, I picked a Hillsong song. Yeah. So that's what I think about this. So one, looking all the way back, anybody that has grown up in the church world or associated with church or anything has heard or sung a Hillsong song.
Sure.
There's the whole empire thing is what Discovery sits here and talks about. It's like, oh, Hillsong is this empire of wealth and prosperity, and they have too much money and this and that. There's so many aspects about this documentary that are very interesting, and some are, you're going, no, that's not accurate, because you're not getting anybody on there to rebuttal it.
Right.
So if you look back, really Hillsong blew up because of their worship, and it started getting out, and people's idea of Brian Houston, he just wants to have a church in every country in the world. He just wanted to get into the United States. He just wants to do this and that. Well, yes, he has the heart for people and wants to spread the gospel to everybody. But the music side of things that's what's frustrating to me, because obviously they're putting out a product and it's coming out of the church, but people are using their gifts and talents for the Lord and should get paid for it. So you write a book and you sell 1 million copies and a New York's best time seller.
Yeah.
You get paid for that.
Right.
And good job.
Thank you.
So
my books are it's like just short of
shy.
Yeah.
Almost made it. Almost made it. So when they're selling 700 million records and making money off of it, the part of it that bothers me, because they're just selling their product, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think a lot of it was the Carl Lentz stuff. And
talk to us about
what
Carl
is
Lentz.
that?
Yeah.
Okay, so Carl Lentz was when Brian wanted to put different campuses on, he started Hillsong New York,
Right.
and Carl Lentz was his lead pastor at Hillsong New York. And he got super famous. I mean, like celebrities were going to church. He teamed up with like Justin Bieber.
I thought Justin was in LA, or is that
Nope, he was at Hillsong New York.
Got it.
And
he rededicated his life because of Carl
Yeah.
Lentz.
Oh wow,
Blew
yeah.
him up even more. Yeah.
Oh wow.
yeah, it was great. And I'm not going to sit here and say Carl Lentz didn't do great things there,
Right.
because clearly he did, but also at the same time he was getting all this attention and all this fame, and I mean clearly fell, which I mean you got to be aware and you got to protect yourself and not put yourself in those situations, which he did. And then he got caught having an affair and that busted out. So what ended up happening was Brian Houston, the founder, the head pastor of Hillsong, had to let him go for obvious reasons. And on the documentary, they're just like, well, Brian's just trying to quote unquote protect his empire, protect the brand. Well, when you've built it up for 30, however many years, and you are the quote unquote CEO of it, yes, of course you're going to protect your brand and your baby and your company. And they're mad about that. It's just frustrating.
Right. Yeah. And Carl needed to take care of his family.
That's
and
correct.
Can't, this is where 1 Timothy 5:8, if you can't take, or, he who doesn't provide for his own family is worse than an unbeliever. And it means financially, but I think that goes beyond that to spiritually, emotionally. This goes into 1 Timothy 3. If you can't take care of your own family, how can you take care of God's church? So you've got that sort of reality that I think he was facing there.
And I think they made it out to even that, Carl Lentz is only Hillsong is thriving because of Carl Lentz and this and that, which to me, Hillsong was mainly about the worship anyways.
Or at least their brand.
The brand of it, right. And how that's the tough part. And they're like, Brian didn't want to, he thought Carl Lentz was getting too big and taking over, and that's why he really wanted him out of there.
An affair.
Right. You're a lead pastor and you had an affair. Obviously, let's help you in life and we'll figure it out. You're going to be okay, but you have to step down from your position and go figure yourself out, get it together. And the way they portrayed everything basically just made it, we got to protect the empire. Right. And that was kind of confusing and I didn't agree with. They brought people in that were volunteers at the church, and basically they were clearly hurt people and people that were hurt by the church,
right,
that they were getting interviewed saying things and tell them that, we volunteered for this many years and this and that. And they were just getting free labor out of volunteers. And you're sitting there going, you're a volunteer. You can quit. You don't have to volunteer, but you're serving. So that was another weird thing about it all. But I, at the end of the day, they just kept going and going, and it does get bad and it does get worse. It really hurts a church as a whole.
Yeah.
As if you want to even call the entire church a community.
Yeah. I think this
is what it is.
This is important because I feel like our inability. So when the world comes in to judge Christians, that's when we lose our evangelistic power. But when the church judges itself, this is what Paul says, who are we to judge outsiders? That's God's job. Our job is to judge those inside the church. And I think what happens when we judge those inside the church, that's when people freak out and say, like, why are you judging me? Well, you're judging me because what you said, you're proclaiming the name of Jesus. You're here, you're under the authority of the church. And so therefore, if we do not judge you, we are not following what God's reality. Now, this is where whether it's in Galatians 6, where, if someone falls in sin, restore them gently. And so there's a reality that there should be some gentle restoration to, and the thing is that you want people back in ministry, but they've got to be at a place where they're taking care of their first priority of ministry, which would be their family. Pastor Joseph, any thoughts on that as we sort of, as you sort of just see a lot of stuff fall apart in the mega church world?
I mean, I don't have a lot of thoughts. I'm not in that world, and so
But what happens when you are in that world?
hopefully I plant enough churches where I don't even get that big. Hopefully we get to 1,000, we plant 500. I don't know, but no, I mean it hurts. Like one of the things Cody said, people see this video to make the church seem just as the enemy, and it can hurt the big C church because stuff comes out. This is why I don't go to church. Look at all this messiness. And I don't know the percentage of mega churches in 8% of all churches are mega churches, even if it's that big, 6%. And so you just think, man, this is what people think of the church,
right? This
one church, and it's a big church. This isn't all the churches, and so
it's 150,000 people in attendance weekly.
Yeah,
but when you think about the millions of Christians there are, that's a drop in the bucket, but still affects because they have such a global impact. It affects how people view our church.
Their influence just reaches literally across the world. And that affects.
And one of my. Do you guys remember the song "Healer"?
Yep. That story's crazy.
Tell the story. You know it?
So, I'm trying to think of his name. It's like Guglielmi or
Giglio?
No. That's the Passion guy. That's the Passion guy. But this guy wrote this song, and the name of it is Healer. And it was a bomb song. It was so good. Like, so good. And it still is.
Right.
I can't take away from the writing of it. But the problem is that this guy came out and basically said he had cancer and all these things, and he wrote this song. So, and this was a Hillsong song, came out of Hillsong, and this guy walks up on stage pulling an oxygen tank with an oxygen mask on the recorded album, and they do
Guglielmucci.
Yeah,
Michael Guglielmucci.
So yeah, it's a weird name. So he comes out to sing the song, and it's obviously video recorded too. And so he comes out and sings the song, takes off his oxygen mask, and does the song, and blah blah. Well, it came out later. He never had cancer. He never had any issues, and it was all made up.
Yeah. He actually had a porn addiction that came out later. Anyway.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Whole nother side note. Yeah. But the thing of it is that everybody has a story, and back. I want to just say putting a lot of things under their rug, and they don't deal with them. But their songs are. Just because they did wrong doesn't mean their songs aren't meaningful or powerful or true.
Right.
There's a problem.
Yeah, it's not like if you sing the songs, then you're worshiping those
Michael
people.
Guglielmucci.
Yeah.
Or you believe
Guglielmucci.
Or you believe what he did was right.
Right.
Yeah.
So the other thing that I thought was interesting, Brian Houston, when he resigned, it was really over inappropriate text messages to a staff member. I don't know if that was sexting or what that was, and that he spent time in a woman's hotel room. I don't know if anything happened, but those are the two things which make me go either it's blown out of proportion, or he did some things that were
So they talk about he had done. I guess he was having trouble sleeping and took some sleeping medication and maybe had some alcohol with it, and he has no recollection of
recollection.
Yeah,
recognition.
Yes. And we're going. He cannot remember anything at all. He completely blacked out. We'll go layman's. So the problem is that you don't know. And in today's world, it's hard because if somebody sees dollar signs, they'll just make stuff up. I don't doubt that he admitted that he definitely went to the wrong room and went in there. Now you fall to where, okay, is he being completely honest, or did he try something? I don't know. I don't know. How long has he been in ministry, and nothing ever like that has come out before. So that's a tough one. The other thing that was huge was his father, who basically started the church that turned into Hillsong. It came out that he had sexually harassed some little boys, and it came out later, and Brian maybe knew about it or didn't know about it. And apparently Australian laws, if you don't report that and you knew about it, then you're also guilty.
Oh, got
it. So that's another thing that's huge right now that he's been going through. So they're holding him accountable for his dad's actions by not reporting it. And then it came out that they're saying he paid off the victim like 10K to
Oh,
keep
gosh.
quiet. And again, some things are being blown out of proportion, or maybe they're not.
Oh man.
So it's kind of tough.
Well,
Yeah.
it's tough when it's you're like, I haven't seen the documentary yet, but you mentioned that, there's no rebuttal. It sounds like, most documentaries are one-sided.
Right, and that's-
there's an
and-
agenda.
They
And
do wanna push
Mars
their
Hill,
narrative.
by
Yeah.
Christianity Today on Mars Hill, I thought was one-sided and unfair. But it is what it is, and it's probably hard to be very objective in that, which is why I have a hard time really. Well, obviously, Discovery Channel is not a Christian organization. Christianity Today doing the Mark Driscoll one is, and that was really disturbing in many ways. It didn't feel like that Mark got a fair shot. Anyway, all right. Well, that's that's a lot that we all took in here.
Yeah.
There's a whole lot.
Yeah, and so what I want us to kind of wrap up with is just that the Christian oneness affects evangelism, but also affects our personal relationship with God and how we see that in a tangible way. And the one way that we saw that the illustration I gave on Sunday is how the tangible love of Christ can be seen at a person's place of despair. And what I think a lot of people say, I don't need to have the church to have a relationship with God, but what they miss out on is actual relationship with the body of Christ, aka Jesus' body. Joseph, any thoughts on that? I feel like that's something that we miss out on when we say, I don't need a relationship with the church. I mean, why do you think it's so important that we have a connection with the body as a whole?
When you have all the parts of the body, that's when it functions at its highest capacity. And you just think about that illustration. If I don't have my foot, I walk with a limp. If I walk at all, just
nice.
Like if everyone is there that represents the body, then we can operate just how God designed us to operate. And it hurts because you see people out. I mean, I have family members that it's like, I don't need church to have a relationship, kind of thing. I was like, I get it, but you're missing out on the relationship with people.
Right.
Like you're hurting. You need someone to confess to be vulnerable with, to help you because you're going through this and you don't know who and will be there to help you and how they'll help you. And you're struggling right now, but it could be mentally, something internal or external. Like it may just be, hey, I need some money, but you don't have anybody to call on because you've placed yourself on this island. And so, I think it's just important that God designed us to be in community. He created us for community, and we miss out on opportunities to be in relationship with people and to grow and to sharpen our minds. Our spiritual growth happens and can happen in community, and we're just missing out on so many opportunities to see God move that way.
Okay, so tell me about this, Cody. How have you seen this in the community?
Say life in general.
Yeah,
really,
life in
because
general. How have you experienced
one
that?
thing that I've learned is who you surround yourself with is kind of more or less who you're going to kind of go off on being like. So when we talk about one of our guys in community group was having an issue with alcohol.
Yeah.
Well, quit going to the bar, quit hanging around with other people that drink. And there's like 4 of them that ended up being friends through community group.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, we click. And they went and got wasted together. So it's like, okay, that's great. But now they're surrounding and you can see them still being friends, but also pull away and find people who can be there for them and hold them accountable and be like, hey man, don't do that again. You're okay. Everything's all right. It's taken care of. You're forgiven. Move on. Let's go. On to the next thing.
Jesus.
That's right.
As opposed to away.
And we've been pushing that so hard is run to it and not from it. So I think that's huge. Even in business life, you want to surround yourself with successful people. So that's a community's huge. It really is.
Yeah,
it really is.
One of the quotes that I've a friend of mine, Trey Ford, really introduced me to the way that Australians say that they, you know how we say we carve out time to do that, and like the way that where we have busy schedules and one of the things that he said to me is that the way that Australians say stuff is like, oh, hey, that's my friend Jim. And when you comment, oh, I make time for Jim, meaning like that's a positive way to talk about a friendship with somebody. And I just the way that was said, I make time for that person, like that I make time for what I value. And so for community group to work it has to be people intentionally saying, I make time for the body of Christ. Not what is this going to give me, but what am I contributing? And it should be, mutually beneficial. But the reality is sometimes there are periods of time where there's a lot more give than there is get. But in that giving, you get from the Lord. And I think that's the part where we then have got to say we have to be filled up from Jesus so that when we're in the realm of doing ministry, that we aren't ministering from the flesh, but then only the result then is flesh and the frustration when someone doesn't do what they're supposed to do. And that's how a lot of us parent. That's how a lot of us do a lot of things. And so I feel like that's where the church needs to have this unbelievable sense of oneness and unity, which relationship with Jesus, and that's lived out through the love one another's. And I think that's where we got to experience that even with this last suicide attempt that we had in our group, which I mentioned on Sunday, was that a young man just feeling lost and despair couldn't see the body of Christ reaching out to him because he just sort of ignored all the text messages. But then after a failed suicide attempt, he looks down at his phone. He just sees that all the people in his life that have been caring about him, have been there the whole time, were the very ones that he just was at group with on a Tuesday night and experienced real genuine love, and that they're there before and after that, calling, texting, saying, hey, let's hang out. Let's be there for one another. And that becomes powerful. So I guess my challenge to listeners is, if you're at a place where you are struggling with life, despairing of life, and you may have forgotten how loved you are, the Christian community is there specifically to remind you that Jesus came, he died, he rose, and the same love that God the Father loves Jesus with is the way that God the Father loves you with, because of that great exchange of righteousness. So therefore, we don't despair. We don't give up hope like the rest of the world does. We walk in the power and faith that Jesus gives us, and then that allows us to love one another, to experience the intimacy with God through intimacy with people.
To tap on that, out of that story, is us talking about community and being around people. And I think, one of my biggest things is we're talking about change and becoming different. And I didn't pick out the song Inside Out just because, but really I've been watching these guys really be completely changed from the inside out. They're getting fed and their spirit is getting stirred, and then it's going to pour out of them. So when we talked about the guy who came in and we're sitting in our group, and we split off to smaller groups, and we had 5 of us in there, and this guy tells me that he basically tried to commit suicide, and our other buddy who has been struggling with suicidal thoughts and his family has been having just a suicidal curse over them, he just straight up says, we need to pray for him. Yeah. And I just turned and looked at him. I was like, well, go pray for him. Yeah. I was like, we prayed over you and we're praying that curse is broken. Go pray for him. And he was like, And I said, no, do it. And he did. And he got up and he prayed for him. And he wouldn't have done that 3 months ago. Yeah. He wouldn't have done that 2 months ago. But it's him being in community and us pouring into his life. Right. And that's just clearly coming out of him now. Yeah. So, I think that's huge.
That's exciting. And I think that's what everybody is hoping, wanting for out of Christian community, where every week you're like, I wonder what God is going to do next. I think when we get to a point where we get stale in our faith, that means you don't want to spend time with God because you're not risking anything. There's no reason to go to God. When you're not spending time with people who are needing Jesus, or there's no vulnerability to a place where we need Jesus, then your community gets stale. And so that's why it's so important to be vulnerable. And it doesn't mean you're going to have suicidal ideations every week in your group, but you are going to have people who are dealing with real life, real stress. And the mission is always clear. Go and make disciples of all nations. And so there should be, your all nations is your next door neighbor who needs the gospel just as badly as you. All right, we're going to wrap up here. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I want you guys to have an awesome week of worship. And don't forget, if you want to text us, go ahead and text at 737-231-0605. We will see you next week with an awesome week of worship.